Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to pick up on the point you just made, because I make a similar point in terms of where do you want to load up your operating profit. I mean, if you're a global manufacturer and you want to take advantage of what I think we have in terms of global advantages, competitive advantages, we're the world's largest market here in the United States, right? I mean, I came from a manufacturing background. I know manufacturers want to be close to customers, so that's an enormous advantage. Plus, we got abundant and relatively cheap power. So if you're one of those global manufacturers, you want to come manufacture close to the world's largest customer with cheap energy, are you going to site your plant in Toronto at 15% or Detroit at 35%? Is that what we're talking about? So you're going to want to site your operating profit or locate your profit in low tax zones, and you're going to put your debt in a high tax zone, correct?
Yes.
I want to talk about the total decision, because we're always talking about the territorial versus worldwide system, which is a problem, traps profit overseas, but then we also have tax rates. And Mr. Koch, you talked about, and I thought it was a very powerful figure, that for every dollar profit under U.S. ownership, you get to keep 62 cents. Under foreign ownership, you'd keep 72 cents. So that's a combination, though, of not only territorial system, but also tax rates, correct?
Well, for us, we keep everything simple. We report every dollar of income in the United States. So the territorial thing doesn't really affect us.
But it affects any other
absolutely
decision here. It's a combination of the two factors. It's really difficult to separate both of them out. Is that basically correct?
Yes, and I'd give you an example that for Emerson, with 58% of our sales outside the United States, more than 50% of our profits are in the United States. And if you look at our sales and exports, we export from the United States to trade customers and to our internationally owned subsidiaries $1.6 billion more from the U.S. abroad than we export from those owned subsidiaries back to customers in the U.S. So yes, you make other decisions as well.
Mr. Koch, you're largely a family-owned business still?
Yes.
I mean, what is your ownership in terms of outside?
We're a publicly traded company, but the publicly traded shares are non-voting shares. And then I have about 30% economic interest, and that's all the voting shares.
So again, you as an individual, as a patriot, you're saying I don't care about the 10 cents. Yeah, I'm going to keep the business here, and I'll pay that 10 cents on every dollar penalty. But I want to go to a public company. And the fiduciary responsibility of a CEO and the board of directors that are reporting to shareholders, which are unions and everybody else, and the pressure, and quite honestly, the fiduciary responsibility, they can't give up that 10 cents, can they? Ms. Pyott.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why, U.S. multinationals, as we heard, do appropriate tax planning, following the rules. And in our case, I would say we were maybe just over the middle of the pack, where we paid a 26% worldwide effective tax rate. In our case, with 40% of our sales being outside the United States. And I can certainly say, in terms of the locus of decision of where to manufacture, clearly for a long period of time, 25 years plus, we'd invested most of our non-U.S. capacity into Ireland because obviously good workforce, well-educated, hardworking, and a tax rate. And given our kind of business where, you're selling eye drops, a little bottle of 5 or 10 ml, freight costs really do not play, any role at all.
Now, what Senator McCaskill is saying, people that run these large corporations can do the math. But again, they also have that fiduciary responsibility. So it's way more than just making a decision or being a patriot. It's about being able to compete, correct? If you don't make that decision, if you take that 10 cent per dollar penalty or even greater, eventually you will not be able to compete, and then you will lose jobs. Is that basically a correct evaluation?
That would be true. In our case, I think we were so strong that we were able to overcome the tax disadvantage because we'd innovated. And when I started, we were a very small firm. It was less than a $1 billion. And we competed against large U.S. multinationals, Pfizer, Merck, and people used to say, how will you survive? Well, happily, we were so focused in eye care that both those companies, for different reasons, left that business, and we were the ones that prevailed and gained market share year in, year out.
Well, eventually you were not able to survive as a U.S.-owned company. I mean, that's the bottom line. Again, we can demonize those individuals that took a look at the tax code. And again, if there was insider trading, that's a totally different subject. But let's assume there wasn't.
Yeah.
But those, we'll call them corporate raiders, they are simply using a tax code and looking at global tax jurisdictions and saying this is a financial transaction that makes a lot of sense. And there was, in the end, nothing you could really do about it other than find a white knight. Which
happened to be a foreign
company, because again, that's the only way they can compete.
That's right.
So this is about math. This is about competition. And again, we can demonize American companies that are trying to survive, which is the wrong way of looking at this, or we can take a look and as the chairman said, point to the real villain, which is a tax code, which forces this. And again, if we ignore that reality, and that's why I want to get to the reality of the situation, is we have an uncompetitive tax code, and if U.S. businesses don't respond to that, they will be put out of business because they won't be able to compete. Is that basically a true statement, Mr. Galvin?
Yes.
I could like to follow on to what you really suggested, and that is companies that are either foreign or have become foreign through the inversion process typically have then used that hunting license and that advantage to keep going. And there's many, many examples where the original transaction was, let's call it 10, and 4 or 5 years later, the quantity of deals they'd done was multiples of that, 3, 4, or 5 times. So you can see there's a secondary effect here as well.
Okay, again, I'll just close again by commending the chairman and ranking member. This is so important. Senator Langford just left. He's in charge of our subcommittee on regulation, which is another big problem when you're trying to attract global capital and keep manufacturing jobs in America. We have such an uncompetitive regulatory environment. But as this hearing clearly shows, as the work as this committee staff has done and the chairman and the ranking member have done, we have an uncompetitive tax system forcing companies, in order to survive, take over that corporate ownership, and then we lose it all. We lose all the income in terms of being able to tax it. So we've got to become far more competitive, and we are highlighting a reality here that we have to admit exists. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.